All right, well, thank you for joining our webinar today. Today our focus in this afternoon's presentation is going to be on sales order and returns. I'm going to have all the attendees in listen-only mode. If you do have a question, please raise it in the chat, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. This session is being recorded, and a copy of the on-demand webinar will be sent to you if you're registered. If you're not registered, feel free to send me a message with your email, and I'll send you a copy as well. Cole is going to be the one presenting for us today. So Cole, go ahead, and if you want to go through the agenda quickly and then go into the presentation.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. This is part of our ongoing COVID free training webinars. Then you just need to understand that we're going to show you some things here. It's going to be kind of rough overview, but if you have further questions or follow-ups or you need specific training, obviously reach out to us, and that's kind of what we're there for. So we're going to talk about sales order at a high-level overview. That's going to include quotes, orders, repeating orders, master orders. We'll touch briefly into drop shipping. For anybody that doesn't realize they can do that in Sage, we certainly can. And invoicing, that includes both sales order, invoice data entry, as well as shipping data entry for those that utilize the shipping process as opposed to just invoicing. And then we'll touch base on RMA with special focus on generating some of the setups you can do, as well as what it actually does. So first things first is I'll go ahead and start with RMA, or sales order. Let me keep this over here. Mute all my work emails so they don't keep coming through. All right. So what you see here is the new Sage 100 2020 version I've been working on. If you were there for this morning, this is the version in the demo in. So let's talk first and foremost about sales order. So sales order, for those that have inventory, et cetera, is a method that you can utilize to create your invoicing, obviously create orders, create quotes. For those that don't have inventory or sales order, this is essentially what you're doing in accounts receivable. You're making an invoice, having the customer come, so sales order is just a little bit more robust and obviously utilizes the other modules. So for sales order entry, it's really basic. We're going to create an order, next available in the system, or I can define a very particular order if I needed to. Now, we've got several types of orders here. We've got standard orders. We've got a back order right away, meaning I already know I'm out of stock. We have a master order. This would be for large-scale selling. Hey, Melinda's going to buy from me, and she promises to buy 10,000 units if I give her this price. And then she agrees to, buy them all within a certain time frame. So I can create a master order for the large set of items she's going to buy, and then create smaller subset orders generated weekly, monthly, daily, that then ping off of that total amount. Same thing for a repeating order. A repeating order would sort of be a standing order in place. Some of our customers sell food and components like that. And a company or a particular client might need a monthly attribution of this 5 things and this 5 quantities. And you can do that with a repeating order. The difference between a master and a repeating order is once the master order is complete, it closes and is seen as fully done, whereas a repeating order can be run through the life cycle. Very similar to sort of repetitive invoice data entry. You can set and expand a threshold for how often you want to run it versus against a total. And a quote is truly what you think it is. It's a quote. We can build a quote in the system. It doesn't necessarily allocate any inventory or anything, but you can then take a quote and promote it to an order once the client approves. So I'll start with a quote. So we're going to generate a quote. Now, I have it currently set that the quote is valid for me 60 days from expiration of the order date, and we're going to automatically assume that the order date is the quote date. So you'll notice it automatically set in this expiration date. In sales order options for entry, you can define the number of days until a quote expires. And do I use the original order date when promoting to an order? So if this was obviously an April 2nd quote, when I make this an order, does it make the order date April 2nd or, not? So these are part of some of the setups in sales order entry. Another thing while we're here in setups is when I put a customer purchase order number in, where do I check for duplication? If my customer uses the same POs all the time, then obviously I probably wouldn't want to check for duplication. If I want to make sure I'm not shipping, or my staff, I should say, is not shipping or creating orders For the same purchase order, then I would check maybe in sales order entry, in invoice data entry. I could check in history, have they ever used this? And then the same thing, maybe they used it on the AR side, and for whatever reason, we do both SO and AR invoicing. Not uncommon, so there's a good point to reference there. So I'll go back to my quote, and let's pick a customer. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. All right, and the customer purchase order number, 12345. So if that had existed in any of my selections, this would have prompted me and said, hey, this customer PO number already exists. So expiration date is defaulted, but I could certainly override this manually. Melinda made the sale, and she said she'd give them to August. So we'll say that's valid until August if they want to pull the trigger on that order. Status defaults to new. And we do have some settings based on customer divisions that dictate what warehouse it's from. For those of you that sat in on Ed Brown's informational webinar on inventory, purchase orders, and bill of materials, you can understand that you can manage multiple warehouses and inventory. Some people do it because, as you can see here, there's an East Coast and a West Coast warehouse. So splitting your stock over geographic location might be useful to you. And these might be real or virtual. You might have a main stock, and then you might have in a 000 warehouse, and you may have your overflow or large quantity boxes and storage containers of item not yet ready or not yet needed into a different warehouse. So it's going to default from the setups you have in division maintenance, or if there are some certain setups in sales order, you can do that. But if you wanted to change it, you could certainly change it here. From the header is where the line detail assumes. So if I pick a code, 8983, you can see it's in the warehouse it's defaulting to. It already tells me there's 100 each. So as I enter an item prior to a quantity, it's already going to tell me what the system thinks I have available, and it's going to default to this warehouse. So I'm going to go ahead and say, no, I get the orders for the O1, but I want to ship this from central warehouse. And now you notice this one only has 27. So we'll ship out of this one, and let's say they're only going to do 17, make a nice easy number left over after. And I can add any comments here, such as, Melinda okayed quote extension, and this is on the quote. This can be, with your customization of your forms, you can either show comments, hide comments. They can be used internally, externally. On the topic of comments and sort of boilerplate, one of the things you can do in miscellaneous item maintenance is create essentially comment codes. You can make a /C1 or a /C2 or a /C3, and they might mean different things. Thank you for ordering, and those, by just typing those codes as a miscellaneous item, we start with a slash in sales order, unlike invoice data entry where we ignore the slash for miscellaneous items. We can put a comment code. We'll say yes, and this is going to be a comment, and then my comment text is, thank you for, remote keyboard, shopping with us, something like that. And that automatically comes through. So again, if I wanted to make an order and my quick one was, /C1, there you go. Thank you for shopping with us. /C2, all orders are required validation through confirmed purchase order emailed to your sales rep or whatever have you. Just one way you can kind of speed up and keep the messages constant and on point. Okay, so we have our quote. Very simple single item. Amount subject to discount would be if you have any discount values set up in the system. So we can create, when you're invoicing, there's discount percentages based on items, based on sales, other margins and things, as Ed probably showed in the last one. And then if they're doing deposits or not. So you can set up to have deposit type entries. Obviously, you can't do that on a quote because it doesn't exist yet as an order, but we can, and we'll get there, talk about deposits. The customer you might require a 50% deposit. And then how does that impact onto invoicing? You might require a full deposit. And what's the difference between a deposit and a payment? And then the payment tab you're seeing would be if we needed to generate an actual credit card process to pull a payment down. So the payment tab is really only for credit cards or ACH, mind you, but that would be using the Paya Connect desktop and your merchant account with Paya. And then you can certainly take a credit card transaction right against the order as the deposit value. Okay, so I've got order number 184. Again, my status is, we're dealing with a quote, and we're good until here. Next, let's make another one. Let's talk about the standard order. Standard order is exactly as you'd think of it. Pick a customer, Next victim, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the ship date automatically defaults to the order date because I'm assuming I'm making this order and shipping it. This is where I would say for a fact, I'm not going to ship until the 16th. And then same thing, where am I defaulting from for the items versus my warehousing? And then it's just simply a matter of, dictating your widget A. And we'll do 4 of these, where, your process is coming from. So payment can be made with an order. You'll now notice I can take deposits. If I was going to say this was a check they wrote, what the check number is, check number 1, and then for how much. So it's the $800 orders. Honestly, I need $400 up front to, secure production of your goods. And now you'll notice the net order balance shows the deposits here. And then what it really boils down to for sales order deposits is obviously the invoicing amount will be less, and then the cash receipt to move from the deposit account to the clearing account. And we'll briefly go over that in some high-level detail. But if you have questions on implementing that process, reach out to us, and we can help walk you through the whole process accounting-wise and how it works. Okay, and then payments. Again, if I had this as a credit card payment, you'll notice that now this tab would go through and says, okay, well, what's my payment ID? What are my transaction types? And then I could actually say I'm going to deposit, pull a value, and then actually swipe or submit a card if I've got this, my PC set up as a terminal, maybe at the front counter, or I'll have to manually key it for use from a stored file from the customer. Okay, so we've got a standard order, just that simple. All right. Next, let's talk about a repeating order, our master order. So I'm going to approach this backwards. So I'm going to say, hey, this is a standing order, a standard order, but I'm actually going to be basing it off the repeating order I've already created. And then the customer number for this repeating order might be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, as this is a partial portion of it. And you'll notice it automatically knows what and what quantities, including a special comment code that's already developed. Because this was all set up very much like repetitive invoice data entry, where I've essentially created it, and I'm just saying, off you go, generate this one for me this time, generate this one for me this time, generate this one for me this time. Same thing, if they require deposits or totals, you can see, now you see this customer has a discount rate, so here's the actual amount versus the discount, the split, which items are taxable or non-taxable, as you may have seen in some of the other stuff we've done. The item itself is either taxable or non-taxable. So this one's non-taxable, 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 and then special amount fields are marked as taxable or not. So we have that. We have the deposits, how to record it correctly, and we'll talk about how to process it a little bit. And then same thing, payment, just it's all the same. So once you get your head around the actual order entry of what you need to handle, ship vias, meaning obviously if I have special shipping, UPS Blue, UPS Ground, FedEx, LTL, anything that I need to dictate to the rest of the system about how this is meant to behave, especially for the shipping data entry guys, this is what you want to do. The confirm to, this is one of the new fields that's been expanded in Sage 100 2020, so it's now 50 characters, so you can write a very large statement, or very, some people use this as sort of a note field often, confirm to Herald English, Herald says approve this, blah, 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 blah. Email and fax numbers have been expanded, and the same thing, so 100C spell check and multi-line, spell check line. Ship to address. This is just like customer management, as Ed probably touched on, was you may have a customer that has several different ship to addresses. Some people would manage multiple customers via unique customer codes. Some of them will manage it with unique customer codes and a bill to customer. So you may have the parent item of the franchise as who I bill to, but I actually invoice and ship to, little sub customers that are all under their umbrella. And this would be many addresses to a particular customer. So if there's none available, it's just going to default to the main address. If we were to pick a unique location code, and we'll call it, California, and then we could give them, a California address that might be unique. 57 Technology might be the delivery suite or whatever have you. And then same thing, what contact, what warehouse do we want to work out of, and then the salesperson can be unique for each particular ship to address. And then same thing, if we're shipping to the California location code, they only want LTL carrier 1, UPS Ground. If we're shipping to the NY carrier code, it has to be UPS, and that's kind of how we go. And then again, the text schedules can change. So you can assign little sub-menus, if you will, within each customer. All right. So let's, what we can do now is we'll accept this, So that's the basic of sales order entry. Now let's talk about our quote. So now I can make this quote to a standard order, and you'll notice that it's going to, the ship date is going to now match the order date, and they're all set to default to the same, and that's, I can just simply move forward and say, yep, they're ready now, and then we're ready to go, and now you'll notice the totals and deposits are done, are available, I should say. So I'm going to use this order, 184, as an example, and we're going to put a check deposit down. Check number 1. For real, and we're going to say it's $150 is what they put down as part parcel of some kind of requirement we've determined. Okay, so before I move on to anything else, I wanted to show you some of the other things. So you've got some of these shortcut buttons. So you've got print this particular order. You've got print the pick sheets for this, if you've used pick sheet printing, about getting warehouse staff to go grab things. And these are one-offs for the particular order itself directly. So you could launch something related to 184 directly, or print the order for 184 directly, as opposed to sales order printing, which will trigger, you'll have to define which ones you want to print there versus printing for a specific order. So if I save that and print this order. So are you really ready to promote this? It's not a quote, we're ready to go. They said yes. You can say yes. And now you can see it doesn't give me an option to pick which sales order because it's only related to this particular sales order. And then I can define several different forms. If I had one for quotes in particular, I could print the quote and send it this way. And we'll touch that at the very end of this presentation about forms and sending things out. And then I encourage you all to check in on Friday, tomorrow, about the paperless office in the afternoon. I'll really go over bulk sending of things via email or bulk printing, and then one-offs like how to print for specific things. So we've got our order 184 promoted. You'll notice one thing I want to make sure you see is that 184 was both the quote number and the order number now. It doesn't promote to a unique number. It promotes to the same order itself. So if you're looking between quote and order, it's here. If I wanted to print the original quote, obviously it's just going to look as an order now if I reprint it because it's no longer in that status. All right. So from sales order, we've got sales order printing, picking sheet printing, shipping label printing. Those type of things would be just forms and codes you want to print. So picking sheet would be for the warehouse. Sales order, I need to print the sales order either internally or to provide to a customer. The most common thing we see is the sales order print to email to the customer. Here's your order confirmed. Hey, here's your, because once we update that order, we have things like the ship date, the ship via, estimated ship dates, backordered status, all those kind of things can be on that form. And so when they get that email, they'll see, oh, great, this thing's supposed to ship on the 16th. Perfect, I can plan my work around that. So once we make a sales order, we're going to then have to either ship to create an invoice or, as you guessed it, invoice to create an invoice. What these do is they're entered in sales order or shipping data entry or invoice data entry, as I should say, here or here. But what they're really creating is they are creating an AR invoice. So if you're looking for this from a data standpoint, once it's all updated and registers confirmed, it would actually be sitting in AR invoice history. So invoice data entry. I'm going to either dictate a number or grab next from the system. Now, if I don't know what customer number I'm working for, but I know what sales order number I'm working for is all I need, I'll key in my invoice number, and we'll go from there. And bam, fills all information out, including the estimated ship date, due date based on terms, and the discount date if they paid right away from the order, like a prepayment. Obviously, it wouldn't be. Nothing else would be valid after that fact. Ship to address, ship via, all that comes from the quote or order itself. Main address might be different than the ship to address, so the Racine warehouse versus their main accounting department in Milwaukee, and then same thing. As we get to the invoice, it's going to ask us if we want to ship, which is what invoicing is technically doing for us. I've confirmed I'm going to bill you for these because I have sent these out. The whole thing or no? Performing yes or no essentially just answers to fill the question in. If I would have hit no, I could have still come in and hit 17, or I could hit yes, and I could still change this to 12. But the idea is if you're going to ship it complete, just simply answer yes, it doesn't autofill. And for this particular line item, you can see that we have a serial number issue. So I'm going to pick a lot to distribute these from, and we're going to grab this one and this one. And now we've distributed fully. Same thing with anything else in the system when using lot serial FIFO, you will need to distribute to keep the system in check, and with the new things like what 2020 has to offer would be for these lot items, you can enable expiration dates. So if I attempted to ship or invoice something that was outside of the approved criteria, I would be prompted for a, sorry, you can't ship this lot, it's expired or whatever have you. So our totals, we can see we have a deposit available, the deposit amount we're going to use. If I did not want to use the deposit for this particular invoice, if it was many partial invoices, I would just simply zero out that dollar amount and that deposit would still be present. All right, so I'll just accept that. And then just like normal, I'd have to batch out with an entry. We have a register, so we'll do our daily sales report and update. I'm going to change this to something in the future because that's where the system believes we are. Whoops, I've unnumbered myself there. All right, and then the perform payment processing would be, do I want to final auth credit cards that have deposits or anything or payments against the other invoice types? If I have none, I can simply proceed or say proceed. And this would be the time where you would move from an auth to a final auth, a pre-auth to a final auth when doing credit card processing. And there's my simple amount. Hey, you didn't print all of these, that's okay. For the sake of this, that's okay. We have a number of reports we can set to default, so we want the daily recap of warehouses, divisions, who I'm selling things what to, and then if my register looked good, I'll say yes to updating, and then I'll just say no for time's sake to the daily transaction register. Shipping date entry works very much the same way. We need a shipper ID. We want to pick the order number we're shipping. This can be scanned with a barcode scanner, or there's other systems like ScanForce and ScanCo. Magnifying glass versus the flashlight. This is applicable to all Sage. Flashlight would be the entry that's in. We haven't entered anything. The magnifying glass would be any orders that are available. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab 185. So item code widget A, how many did I ship? They told me to ship 4, and you can see there's no pricing, there's no costs. My shipping guys are just simply telling me what I shipped. And then same thing, where it came to, how they're supposed to ship it, and then they could come in here and key in the tracking number they generated with things like Starship or other integrations. You might go to a separate program, print the shipping, and have it right back to Sage with all that fun stuff. So now this is marked and indicated. I've picked my 4, and you can see that's as simple as it is. Did you ship it? Yes, no. If you didn't ship it, is it going to back order? And then the other thing I can do is item packaging. I could then say which packages in. These are all in one package. I can add 3 packages, 4 packages, 1 each, define that, and then all the individual tracking numbers might be something unique that I can then create. I understand we're going through this at a pretty quick clip, but I want to give you as much as you can about the basic functions, and then obviously if you have specific questions on things, we'll revisit. If you guys need some one-on-one training or things like that, you can engage us in that. Okay, so you'll notice shipping date entry is very clean, very simple, and just a method for staff that I don't necessarily want invoicing or don't expect them to have that responsibility, but I don't want to have to do it twice. If they're already going to be shipping it, why don't they just tell me what they've done? It's the nice way to do it. So I'm going to hit yes to this. This is asking me because I may have multiple orders. So with 2019 and 2020, you can ship multiple sales orders on a single shipping invoice, provided they match certain criteria such as term codes, delivery address, ship via, those kind of things. So I'm going to say yes, and it's going to, hey, do you want to use packing slip printing? We'll say okay, but we won't actually print anything. And then just like anything else, I will do the daily sales report and update. Again, fix our dates for the future. And then we'll just preview this. And essentially what it's doing is it's just creating an invoice, but the only thing it's filled in was the amount of items shipped. We haven't printed and we know that. Thank you. No, 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 and a yes. So now the sales order, if I look at an inquiry, will show total inquiries, quantities shipped. The customer will see it in their invoicing, accounts receivable, customer maintenance, customer inquiry will see those items. And those are your 2 methods to essentially complete the shipment and invoice of a product. So I build my sales orders, I can do invoice data entry, and then leave the shipping world alone, or I can create a sales order, have my shipping and data entry team enter their process and have that automatically update invoicing. The one thing I will jump back on for invoice data entry and sales order is this is also where we can create credit memos, debit memos, and a direct cash invoice. So they all behave a little differently. If we want to make a credit memo for something, I can certainly, this would be without RMA. I just need to make this customer a credit memo. I would select credit memo, pick the customer. Oops, that's an inactive customer from our earlier demonstration. And then I can say this credit memo applies to one of their open invoices as such. So it might be simply, 5 minus 5 is equal to 0 type of an event, or it's a partial credit prior to payment against something else. If I don't apply it with this number, it creates a credit memo on their account, which will then need to be applied via a cash receipt entry. This credit memo is good against this invoice, and then add this payment type of an event. The other thing is I can use miscellaneous codes. So I could give them a charge code back, and all values entered as a positive are a negative on a credit memo. And the key is, miscellaneous charge doesn't have its own defined thing. The key is that if it's a credit memo, you have to think backwards. And then if I need to, I might make a debit memo to add something for like a shipping fee or freight that was supposed to be agreed upon, but they didn't fulfill their portion of a requirement or something. So I don't have to make a new invoice for just that. I can make a debit memo and then again treat that as the portion of which it goes back against the invoice. And then cash sale invoice is truly just cash sales. Okay. I'm going to jump to RMA because I know sales order took up a large portion of time. If you have specific questions on things like the deposit we talked about that I briefly demonstrated, but we need to talk about the AR cash receivable size and all of that kind of fun, reach out to us and we'll, if that's a process you want to engage in, we can help define what you need and how the best way to account for that is and what you'll need to use in cash receipts. Okay, RMA. For those of you that are doing sales order, you're very likely doing purchase order, and that's the easiest way I can explain RMA to you is that RMA behaves very much like a purchase order or very much like a sales order. So we can create an RMA entry, which is essentially the note in the system that this RMA has been engaged. But until we actually do an RMA receipt entry, much like I can have a purchase order, but until I get the goods and do a receipt of good entry, nothing's really impacting the system. I'll start with setup because the really important ones to note for RMA options would be how are we generating replacements? Do they get $0? So am I qualifying sales or not? And then if the item invoice number is required on all returned items. For many distributors and manufacturers especially, you might take returns directly from your distributors and vendors that you sold to, but then customers might be able to also submit to you under a manufacturer's warranty. Since you would not have been the one to invoice them, you can't really require to have an invoice for all items because it'll simply say that invoice doesn't exist, or you wouldn't be able to find an invoice for that appropriate customer type of an event unless you wanted to sort of backtrack it through the vendor or distributor and have them issue out the credit after you issued them a credit, that type of a thing. Entry defaults, what's the customer default action, what's the item default action, and what's the vendor default action? Do we have special warehouses for returns and scrap? Are we tracking scrap? And can my staff change the warehouses between the two? Well, I'm going to bring this one to quarantine instead of returns because I know for a fact this one had a problem that engineering or production needs to look at, that type of a thing. And then do we calculate restocking charge fees? If so, and then on the individual customers, you can actually define what the restock percentage is on items too. We won't cover that today just because we're short on time, but it is an option. I can say that this item gets a percentage restock fee and it's 3% or 5%, that type of a thing, versus a fixed fee. And I can also dictate fixed fee. All right, so let's make an entry. RMA entry. So again, this is like creating the sales order, purchase order. Here's the number I have. It's for this particular customer. Next victim. How long is this RMA approval until? I'm going to give you 30 days to send this back. Otherwise, I'm assuming you're not engaged into this. And you can change that based upon your company policies. They're going to send it back by mail. This is not necessarily me giving them a return label. This is just how I'm expecting it to come to. Where are they going to ship it to? And then who are they contacting when it ships back? So does my team need to inspect this upon receipt, or do I take it at word? Obviously, I would always have that set. You'll see the term cross-ship. So the normal RMA process would be, great, you're gonna claim a defective item. I'm going to have you send it back. I'm going to inspect it, and then I'm going to send you out an item. That would be the in first and then the out. What a cross-ship says is, okay, I understand you need this right away, and with my wonderful customer service, I'm going to send you out this item directly, and then when you get it back, I'll credit you. I'll credit against this portion for obviously what was planned. Cross-ship, if enabled, will allow you to ship an item out to the customer, create a new sales order for it, create an invoice in their system, and then the idea is if they don't return the other one to you, you already have an invoice to bill them against, and if they do return it to you, then you can apply the credit memo that's created against on the receipt of entry against the RMA against the invoice created for the cross-ship. It's essentially, do I want to pre-ship them something or do I want to wait for something to come back? And then do I print a customer RMA and do I print an RMA receiver? Customer RMA is what you often get from Amazon. Hey, here's your RMA approval number. Melinda approved RMA number 7 for you. Please send this back by this date, this address. RMA receiver is, okay, warehouse, I'm expecting RMA number 7 to come back within the next month. Here's the items that are back on it, and I want you to look for this, this, and this. So again, address where they're going to ship it back to, who it gets billed to if they don't set us things, and then the lines are simply as such. If I have an invoice number for them, I can select one to then go against an item code, and I will only be able to pick the items from that invoice number. If not, I can just say, hey, they're returning this one. So again, if you offer a warranty beyond the people you sell it to as a manufacturer or as a distributor that offers something like that, then you can have that there. So I'm going to say this was defective. The customer action is going to be a replacement, and they're going to give me one of these back. And then the item action, I can leave it none, but basically, do I put it back to stock or do I scrap it? I'm going to say this is all good, and they just ordered the wrong one, and 100% we're okay with it. I can add my own reason codes. I cannot change my actions. My actions are either replace, credit, or scrap. Unit price, what did I sell it to them for? If this item doesn't have a defined price for it, it's going to show up as 0. And if it doesn't understand which one or a change it may have been, and it's asking for you, I'm going to say this was a $6 item, even though I know it's not. Hey, the price is less than the cost. So it'll also warn you when you have your costing. And just to let you know, the current price and the average price, average cost, I apologize, are displayed and shown to you in case you don't want to have to go digging through with a right click, related tasks, and then find the different reports type of an event. So managed cost is $20, price is $41.50. I'm going to say we gave it to them for $45. Eventually I'll get it for 45. Okay. Now you notice when I accept that, since it's above cost and it's within range, it doesn't prompt me for anything. And I might have a comment for this that says, hey, this is just a simple return, already approved, already vetted via video call or whatever. I trust this vendor, go ahead and do this thing. Cross-ship, you can see this checkbox. So we might say it's a cross-ship order, but not all are applicable to cross-ship. And so you can check them one off by one off. So RMA number 7 is in the system. I can go to print. I'll grab one of our forms. And here's my customer RMA printing. So this is what I can print and send to a customer. Here's your approval. Please include this in the box or keep this for your records, that type of event. RMA receiver printing. This is for my staff, my internal staff, whether that's the warehouse or the dock or the lab. Here's the RMA numbers that are coming back or printed but not printed, including RMAs on hold, and then print this out to give to your team to have sort of a receiving list. I know we've got plenty of clients that are really generous with their RMA policy, and it kind of boils down to, well, wait, what customer was this for? What RMA was this for? Because it might come back a month, month and a half later after their customer does its thing. So at this point, all we've generated is an RMA. It's in the system, it's approved, but we've made no impact on anything else. Obviously, all customers are awesome people, and they would never lie to us. But in the event they do, the reason we have an entry and a receipt is they may have told me this thing was brand new, unopened in the box, but when I look at it, this thing has clearly been running over with a tank. So RMA number, receipt numbers. So I'm going to do a receiver here. Which customer was my list for? I can do one steps. I can do RMA receipts against the individual one. So I could go right to receipt entry with inspect upon receipt and make them a new one, or I could do a receipt against the RMA entry itself. So we can make a one-off right even in there. Just send it back. I'll take care of it. That type of a handhold, or again, entry and receipt. So once the entry and receipt are done, then we have our generate transactions. So I'm actually going to come back here. I'm going to get over to number 7. And I'll go over some of these options with you. So let me expand this a little bit, make it understandable. So customer action replacement means I'm going to send them a good. Credit memo means I'm going to issue them a credit in place of the item. I just want it back. Sometimes you don't want to pay for the shipping back, or you don't want to worry about the hassle, and it's something that you can just tell them to forget about it. You've shown me proof. I'm just going to give you this. So credit memo, we only give them a credit on their account, which you can then do AP for me or clearing. if you want to pay them a check or something like that. Or the credit memo can be returned against their credit card. If they paid via a Paya credit card, you can automatically create a credit memo that goes back against their card. Replacement is I'm going to send you out something new. And again, with cross-ship, it's do you want to, am I going to ship you this prior to you giving it back? And if so, you'll owe me for this less the credit or whatever have you. So now if I accept this, it says, hey, do you want to create the sales order? So before I've done any receipts, before I've got anything back, it's going to let me create a sales order to cross-ship this item. And there it is, simple sales order, which then goes into your normal processing queue for either invoice data entry or shipping data entry, but it would just be in the normal sales orders as is. And then if you look at the header, you can say that this is against, RMAs. RMA number 7 is all right here, presence available at the order entry screen, so know exactly why it's from and why because it's a cross ship, it has a price versus being defaulted to no, and the price is going to be at the current average price, the current set price for it, versus the 45 I gave them credit for. So again, depending on how you're managing it and what you're going to do, there are some things you need to watch out for. Okay, so after we've done our entries, we have generate transactions. I'm going to show you this. Now, what this says is, okay, great. You've given me any number of RMAs, whether it's 1 or 100 today. How do I want to process this? And what this actually does is doing the receipts entry just finalizes your receipt in RMA. It doesn't create the credit memo yet. It doesn't, besides the cross ship, it won't create the sales order yet. It just simply validates that the customer said it was good for replacement. Upon receipt, I said it was good for replacement, and we're ready to move forward. Generate transactions is what does the entirety of the work in regards to RMA. This will make a new purchase order number if things have to be purchased from a vendor, if it's kind of a dropship item. The PO return number, if I've got to return it against a vendor for this defective problem, will automatically be created based upon this. The next sales order number, this is just again from if I went to sales order entry and hit next, this would be the next one. And then same thing for invoice numbers. On credit memos, if they've got multiple things on the same thing, they're all being qualified as a return. Do I consolidate those restock charges, if at all? And then the same thing, am I creating one item if I consolidate by a vendor that I purchased all these from? Do I summarize multiple items? And obviously, I want to add the RMA number as a comment line. So if I say proceed, nothing good there. Let me do a quick entry. I'll just do a one-off real quick. Number 7. Receive the whole thing. So again, I'm just doing the set value here, and the same thing applies. I need to give it a stock lot, expiration, FIFO, whatever have you, as it comes back. So I'm going to call this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so now this one, I'm saying replace. We're not cross-shipping. We're not doing anything else. This was my original entry, not the one-off. So we're going to say accept. Okay, and now we're going to go to generate our transactions. Now I'll proceed. Okay, so here's the listing. I'm going to print this to PDF. Thank you. All right, printed it. I've got a record of the list of what I'm doing. Are you ready to generate these? So I had replacement for the customer. So now if I come to sales order entry, if I had it credit, it would create a credit memo, but I'm going to go to sales order entry. So again, it's not the invoice, it's the sales order. And the next one was, here we go for AVNet. And there's our code for 1 at the price. Again, on the header, we can see what RMA number it was from. So now the idea is if this was a cross ship and I sent this early, they didn't send me that it went back, I have an invoice in the bill and it's ready to send to them. We can get into a huge detail about how the purchase order side works, for how to link items, for default vendors, for purchases on dropships. But I think to not get too down a rabbit hole for just particular people, I'm going to go ahead and sort of stop the presentation there. So again, we've covered basic sales order entry. We can invoice or ship data entry to invoice. RMA is essentially just like creating a purchase order or a receipt after the fact. Again, customers never lie, but if they do, we could always alter the selections between your customer service rep or your manager that approved the RMA versus the warehouse staff or entry staff that saw the condition and brought it back to say, there's no way we can put this to stock. It's got to be scrapped. I don't care if you still want to give them the credit, but this can't go there. The one thing I do want to touch upon is we do have a lot of clients that use RMA for price variance. Hey, I bought this and you just had an awesome sale. Can I get my 20% discount? If you credit somebody just like in invoice data entry, if I create a credit memo via RMA or via sales order invoice data entry credit memo or accounts receivable credit memo, well, not accounts receivable because we want to refer an item. If that item has a specified cost and you return that item to the system with a credit memo, because that's what credit memos do. If you sell an item on a credit memo, you're returning that item into the system, into inventory and into cost if you're not scrapping it. That cost is coming back to the system. So if it's a $1,000 item in COGS and you say, okay, I'm going to give you a credit for this for $50, just making up numbers, and that invoice is updated as a credit memo for -1 of these returning at $50 price to the customer, you are going to give the customer the $50 delta, but the COGS for the item is going to be returned at $1,000. So it's important that if you're just trying to do price variance, that you look at either creating credit memos with miscellaneous codes or some kind of track code to understand there is no cost to this and you're just giving them a price delta. That's one common mistake I see. So people wonder why their COGS accounts are way off or overinflated or underinflated. And that's often the culprit I see. Oh, sorry, you were supposed to get this special discount. So there's a couple ways to handle that. You can obviously use miscellaneous code. You can return the full item and then sell the item to them at the delta. So yes, I'll give you 500 back, but I'll sell you a new one at 450. And that way the cost of both the in and out match. So that's the important part to think of, is just the rest of the way the system processes when performing any of these. Okay, so I understand I talk a mile a minute. I'm trying to cover as much as I can, but if you need some one-on-one fine holding, if any of these sort of processes are new to you and you want to implement them for your companies, reach out to us and we'll gladly help. And Melinda, I don't know if you still want to take some questions. I know I'm already 15 minutes over.
There are no questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions for Cole? Feel free to just unmute yourself and speak up if you do.
I have a question on RMA. Are you able to do a return back to stock where it doesn't add it back into inventory, or is that what the GL code was for regarding writing it off?
So you can return it to scrap, which doesn't put it to inventory, and that's what that reference is. Some people will do, so that's an excellent question. The other thing I should mention is, obviously a lot of us that manufacture have bill of materials processes for developing items. So some might return the item to a quarantine warehouse or to a return warehouse, which puts one of that item into inventory. And then they'll do a production disassembly entry, which I know Ed covered, to break that item into its components. Say it's got 20 pieces. It'll bring all 20 pieces back to inventory, and then they'll adjust out the 2 broken ones if everything else can be repurposed. So depending upon, yes, you can scrap it, and it doesn't go to inventory because it writes off to that GL account. Or I can bring it in, disassemble it for a produced item, and then adjust out the bad part.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can go down a rabbit hole for just about anything. So you wouldn't have an odd question if you wanted to ask one, but we just obviously won't cover it as a group.
On the quote numbers, when you promote a quote to a sales order, would the quote number keep the same sequential numbers?
Yes.
So
You'd
like
be
if I
using,
generate a sales order 1456, my quote number that I enter next will be 1457, and then if I promote that, okay, good.
Then it'll stay at 1457 between quote and order. Correct.
Okay. Okay. Now,
and then for
also,
shipping,
sorry, I have a lot of questions.
Go ahead. I'm sure it helps everybody.
The quotes for prepayment, like right now we generate pro forma invoice. Do you find that your accounts prefer quoting to obtain prepayments? I know it doesn't hold inventory, and that's one thing that our company is looking towards, obtaining the payment before we commit the inventory. So
yeah,
that
so that would
avenue
be
we would take?
Well, yeah, so quote would be, here's the quote, here would be your estimate. If I wanted to reserve the order for that customer, as it were, this is what your estimate would be with all the pricing that we've determined by adding these things. You could give them the quote. You can't take a prepayment against the quote. You can only do a deposit or prepayment against an order. So you'd have to promote the quote to an official order to take the deposit. But then, yes, you could certainly not invoice a penny, create the deposit. So in sales order entry, I would make the deposit on the order. And then in cash receipts, I could do a receipt of check or the credit card or whatever it be for that deposit to a deposits clearing account. And then the idea is when I invoice, that'll be swept out in the GL transaction so that if I look at that account as a bucket, it'll be net zero for everything that I either have a deposit and have it shipped. There'll be a positive value or vice versa. But that's what you would do, correct. You use the deposit total field, whether it's by check or by credit card or whatever have you, and then cash receipts functions to sort of keep the balance between, yes, they've paid me, so I have cash in the bank and the deposit's marked and done. And then as I invoice, it will then relieve that cash deposits account if it's set up correctly so that you should net to zero after everything's said and done.
Now, if our customers send wires, in order to generate a wire, they need an invoice. Would the quote be sufficient for an invoice for them to generate the wire, and then once we receive it, we promote it to a sales order?
Well, that would be more of an internal decision for you, but yes, the quote, if promoted to an order, will always retain the same number. And again, when I invoice, so whether it be invoice data entry or shipping data entry, I could certainly, I know one of my invoices is 184, I could certainly, if the invoice number is available and has been used, I could certainly mark that on the same. So the sales order, the quote, and the invoice number could be the same. It's just in the system, if I hit next, it's going to take the next sequential. So that could be an idea to keep all of those together.
Okay. Thank you. That was all of my questions. I appreciate it.
All right. So again, if you've got questions, feel free to email us, call us, reach out to us. If any of this seems to be a good process for anybody or wants to know more in depth about things and want to implement this, obviously you can engage us in support and training. But we wanted to show you, especially for people that are wearing many new hats, there's a big world to go into. If we keep it simple and keep it straightforward, everybody should sort of be able to move through this together, even if it's the first time you're doing it. I encourage you to join us for the other webinars. We're going to be doing GL tomorrow morning, Paperless Office tomorrow afternoon, which is about transmitting all these documents like orders, invoices, things like that electronically. No more licking stamps, touching envelopes, or touching paper that we then give to other people in this current COVID environment type of thing. And I really appreciate all your time today. And again, feel free to reach out to us. We'll do our best we can to make sure everybody's taken care of and happy.
That's great. Thank you, Cole.
All right.
Thank you for everyone for attending. We appreciate it, and give us a call if you need anything.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.